So now we have input a project into the database, we will go to the person days input. So as we saw in the introduction video, the pie chart of a projected archaeology companies projected emissions, we saw that a large proportion was overhead emissions. So these overhead emissions are, for example, office electricity or staff commuting, and these emissions need to be split up between the projects, as these emissions, the activities that are causing these emissions, are contributing to project delivery as well. So to address this, the tool uses a method to allocate these overhead emissions to each project based on full-time equivalent person days. So the tool calculates office-based emissions for a project by using the proportion of full-time equivalent person days required for the project relative to the total full-time equivalent person days worked by project staff across the organisation. So it's a proportional allocation. So it's important to, when doing the total company person days, that we exclude non-project staff such as HR or finance or IT, as these do not directly contribute to project delivery, and if included, then we would never, 100% of the emissions would not be spread out, even if you input all of your projects into the tool. So on this tab, we need to provide a variety of data. So you need to input total company person days at monthly resolution. So any available person days for staff directly involved in project delivery. Now this does not just refer to any projects that you are reporting on within the tool, but refers to projects both that you are reporting within the tool and those you choosing not to use the tool to report on. So across the whole organisation. Again, should not include non-project staff such as HR. And then, in addition to the total company person days, you also need to input project-specific person days. So these project-specific person days are the days worked by employees on a particular project. So, and then for both total company and project-specific person days, we need to input actual and forecasted days. So once you've input all this data, the tool uses the total company person days to calculate emissions, overhead emissions per person day, and then these emissions are scaled according to the quantity of project-specific person days for that same period worked on for the project that you are wanting to export a CSV of, for example. So, to ensure that this methodology functions correctly, you must enter the total company person days before entering project-specific person days. The tool will not allow you to enter project-specific person days for entries that do not already have a corresponding total company person days data input in the database. Additionally, the tool will not allow you to enter more project-specific person days across all projects that you're reporting on within the tool than the total organisational person days within a given month. So if you've input 100 days for total company and you've already input 80 days for project A, and then you try and input 50 days for project B, it won't allow that, because then you would have more days worked on project A and B than you have for the whole organisation, which doesn't make sense. And this avoids over allocation of the emissions, as if you could have this happen, then you would end up distributing more than 100% of the overhead emissions between the projects that are in the tool. So to get this right, you need to follow quite a strict sort of process to enter the person days. So you need to start by entering the total company person days for project staff. Once you've entered these for both actual and forecast, you can then proceed to input project-specific person days for the projects that you want to report on. So it's really important that accurate data is entered into this tab, as it's critical for producing the reliable project carbon footprints and allocating the overhead emissions correctly and fairly. So let's start by entering your name, and then say we want to report on actual person days. So as I just said, you need to first enter the total company person days. So greyed out box means you do not need to enter a project code. And so let's just do this for the whole of 2024. So year needs to be in a format, so 4 digits. Month is a drop down, and then your person days will also need to be a numeric input. So let's just do the whole of 2024. So now we can see these inputs in the database below. So those are actual person days. So now I'm going to, the next step is then to input actual project specific person days. So the project drop down, we've only entered one project into the tool, so we can only enter data for that project. So this is why it's important to do the project input as one of the first steps of using the tool, because otherwise there would be nothing in this drop down. So say we wanted to add for 2024 January, 50 person days were worked on project CH001. Now, say we change this to forecast, you would get an error saying you were attempting to enter project specific person days before any total person days for the month have been input. This is because we entered actual person days rather than forecast person days. And as I said at the beginning of this video, you must enter total company person days before entering project specific. So if we change this back to actual and then enter it, then you can see the entry down here. So essentially a little bit more about the allocation methodology. So we've said that there are 100 total organisation person days in January, and that 50 of those 100 days were worked on this project. So the tool would allocate 50% of overhead emissions within January 2024 to this project, and the other 50% would not be allocated to anything at the moment. So if you're only reporting on one project, you would assume that that 50% will be allocated to projects that you're not reporting on within the tool. So yes, that's how the allocation works. Again, you can recall it and change it. So say I'll recall that record, so record number 13, and I don't know, incorrect data input. So, oops, I'm now going to demonstrate. So we said there are 100 total person days input. So if we try and put 150 days in, this is more than the total company days that we have input in for that month. So if we try and add that, it says inputting this data would mean there have been more project person days worked than total person days in this month. So if this happens, you can either change the entry you're making right now, or recall the total organisation person days input and increase that accordingly. So let's just clear that. Perfect.